This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Tyler. My guest today is Dr. Jen Canty. Hello, Jen. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, and hello yourself.
I'm very excited you are here with us today because you were one of my guests who volunteered to be a guest. You heard about Thank You Mama and you said, I want to talk about my mom, and I love those guests. Jen is a psychologist, a book author, a podcast host, and here it comes, homicide survivor.
Right.
Jen, many people don't know. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, it sounds contradictory, doesn't it?
It does.
Homicide survivor is a term that's maybe American-based, I don't know, in which it's trying to define somebody who has been confronted with homicide in somebody very close to them. It could be a daughter, a son, a spouse, close friend, and they are left to grieve that death, that violent death.
So do you want to tell me about your experience shortly? Because as we just said, we are here to talk about our moms.
Right. Well, it does relate to my mom because I would credit her a great deal with my ability to pull through it. The person that died was my spouse. He was killed in 1985 in Detroit, and it was a pretty publicized death. The media grabbed the story and ran with it. His two perpetrators were caught. They were imprisoned. One got the maximum sentence and ended up dying in prison, actually. The other one had a fairly light sentence and was let out. It was a turning point in my life, to say the least. The media would not relent, and it eventually led to my leaving Detroit altogether because they just would not leave me alone.
Jen, how old were you? I think that's important for the story.
I was about 37, just finished schooling. Yeah, I was in the last months of my postdoctoral fellowship when it happened. And most people will tell you if they're a homicide survivor, they didn't see it coming. It's just one of those not common events, but it's one that happens, and you either sink or swim. I mean, that's how I look at it, and I chose to swim. I was not going to let it get me down and keep me down.
So I read you moved. And
yes, as far away as I could get.
And started a new life.
I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I changed career directions. I eventually, many years later, remarried. I adopted two special needs sisters that were in foster care, in part because their mom was murdered and their father was incarcerated on unrelated charges. So the social worker felt we would be a good match because I would be able to help them as they got older with the whole concept of being a homicide survivor. Mm-hmm. And that was many years ago, and they're adults now, and one is a mother.
Oh, beautiful.
So that was a new turning point in my life, too. I'd never been a mom, so I wasn't sure if I could be a good mom. I mean, I had never been one, and then all of a sudden they're like presenting me with two children instantly.
How old were they?
They were 3 and 4.5.
Oh, and that's not an easy age to jump in.
No. And especially their foster home wasn't the best either. So they'd had a lot to process when I got them. They really did. The saving grace was that they'd always been kept together, and I think that did help soften some of the blows that they would have otherwise had to deal with alone.
Mm-hmm. And did it work out for all of you?
Oh, I'm crazy about my kids.
Oh, that's
yes.
Beautiful.
I love them to pieces, and we're in constant contact, and I'm trying to get my older daughter to move back from New York to Washington State. She's a sweetheart. They're great. I mean, they graduated school. They're hard workers. My younger one is a great mom to her special needs child. And she doesn't live too far from me. And one of the most poignant moments, I would say, in that whole journey was when I needed a caregiver for several months while I was going through a stem cell transplant for cancer. And she was only 21, and I asked her if she would do it because my husband was away on business. He couldn't be there. And she dropped everything and came. And it was a huge responsibility on her young shoulders to take my temperature every few hours, to give me 25 different medications, to make sure my appointments were kept, et cetera, et cetera. And I could see the wear and tear on her over the course of those several weeks. And I finally said to her, I've put a lot on your young shoulders. I feel so bad. And she said to me, I'll never forget this. She said, well, Mom, you saved my life and now I'm saving yours.
Oh,
so
and she did. How long ago is this? Are you clear?
That's 2015. There's never going to be a cure for the kind of cancer I have, but I'm doing as well as I can be expected.
Congratulations. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. So did the stem cell transplant work? Is that what it's called?
So far. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's there's two different kinds of transplants. There's an autologous, which is where you take your own cells, they blast them with chemotherapy, and then they reinsert them into you. That's the kind of stem cell transplant I had. And then there's the donor transplant, and there's pros and cons to both, which is a whole nother show. But to say the least, it was. They didn't promise as an effective response as they got. So I'm pleased. I'm not on any medications right now. I refused to go on them after I went through the procedure because the side effects are cancer from the cancer drugs that they give you.
Yeah.
So I said, no, thanks. And so far, so good.
Keep up.
Yeah.
Jen, I'm so full of information right now that I'm processing, which from homicide to special needs children to cancer. And wow, Jen, what a life. But let's talk about your mom and her role in your life. Let's talk about her first.
Okay.
Her name is Lou.
Yes, it's short for Lucille. She went by Lou. And she was just the epitome of what a great mom should be. I miss her terribly. And yet she had no reason to be the outstanding mother she was because she had a rough life. She was very close to her biological father, who died when she was age 12 from a medical mistake. And her mother subsequently married and divorced 4 times, and they were all alcoholics, and they were very poor. She told me how every time they moved, it would be in the middle of the night, usually to beat the rent. And she'd have to leave a lot of things behind because they'd be fleeing. And so that meant a lot of different schools, too, and no room for friends. And she did go to school, and she liked school, but her mom would pull her out to go to work, even though she was 15, 16 years of age.
Where was she growing up?
She was born in Jackson, Michigan, and she moved to Detroit, fortunately, because that's where she met my dad in high school. This is how they met. It was so sweet. They met in English class, and my dad says that my mom gave him the first note. She said it's the other way around. But at any rate, they had their first date. My mom was so excited, and so was he. And they got all dressed up, and the night came, and my mom was waiting, and he didn't show. And she's like, what? And, of course, this is well before cell phones, right? And my dad, when he pulled up, it was an empty house. And he's like, what the heck? She gave me a bogus address. Ooh. So he was angry with her. She was angry that he didn't show. But they had a friend that heard both sides of the story, thankfully, because he put it together. And what he realized was that my mom had failed to tell him that they lived in the back end of the house. And so when he pulled up, it was dark. He didn't think to go around to the rear. And she was stood there waiting for him, and he never showed. So once they understood what the mix-up was, then they're like, oh, okay. So they ended up dating, and one night shortly after that, a few months after that, he was dropping her off, and she walked in the house and started screaming as she was going up the stairs. And he fled in the house and said, what's going on? And there was a big old, huge rat staring at her on the staircase. And she broke down and started telling him what her life conditions were like. It was pretty bad. They had to share the bathroom with a bunch of tenants, and it was filthy. And she was embarrassed that my dad saw it. And he just hugged her and he said, I'll take you away from all this, I promise you. And he did.
Oh.
They had a great life together. They were married 73 years before he died, and happily.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I know. So she had a lot of things to overcome. My dad's family was excellent, so thankfully they had that going for them. But I asked her one time, I said, how did you become such a great mom, considering your mother, who I never was close to, my grandmother? And she just said, I just did the opposite of whatever my mom did.
How many siblings did she have?
She was the oldest of 5. And she graduated. She worked. Then she had my brother, and then my sister and I are twins. She had us. And life went on, and she had a debilitating stroke when my dad and her were still together in March of 2001. He passed away in 2013. He took care of her until then. And then my sister took her in, and they moved closer to me. And my sister and I kind of expected it to happen real soon. And so I brought my granddaughter over to meet my mom, and they only were together 2 weeks before my mom passed along. So one of my favorite photographs is my granddaughter with my mom, because that's the only one I have. And I was with her, alone with her in her last moments, and it was sad, but she wasn't feeling well, and she missed my dad, and all of her friends had passed on by then. So, it was difficult, but it expected, I guess you could say, because she was in her 90s.
So she supported you through both of these things, through surviving the homicide and then dealing with your cancer.
Dealing with the homicide, she had a more active role. Of course, she was a lot younger. Yeah. They flew into town. They were living in Phoenix at the time, and they flew into Detroit. And immediately, she took charge of making sure I was fed because I wasn't eating, making sure I was changing my clothes. I hadn't changed my clothes in days. It's hard to describe. It was more like one long day. It wasn't in 24-hour segments. And she just came in and just said, you got to get a shower. You got to change your clothes. I'm going to make you eat. You need to go to get some sleep. And she took charge of that and was very concerned, but also my moral support, and my dad did what he could as well. He took charge of the phone and the doorbell and the media, and he literally stood by my side when I had to identify my husband. So they both had a role in it. My mom she said to me years later when I was writing my book, and I interviewed her because there was questions that came up I never thought to ask her until I wrote the book. And one of the things that she told me was that speaking as a mother, one of the hardest things she ever had to do was to leave me and go back to Phoenix before the trial hit, because they didn't know if they caught everybody associated with it. I was left alone in this big house I never wanted, and I wasn't sure how I was even going to afford it. And the winter was just descending, and she said it was very difficult to leave, but she knew she had to. And being a mom is not easy, and you have all these challenges, and she did what she could. She really did, and I'm so pleased that she raised all of us to have self-confidence, because never for 1 minute, not for 1 second, did I have a doubt I'd be able to get through it. I didn't know how. I didn't know how long it would take, but never ever did it cross my mind I would be collateral damage to this nightmare I was in. Never. I always knew I'd come out of it and be okay. And I did.
Beautiful. What a strong person and big support she was.
She was.
Will you tell me, we were talking about her lessons, about things you've learned from her.
Right.
I'm curious to hear about this.
Some of it was not verbal. Some of it was just watching her in different situations. But if I was to pin it to 4 verbal things that she said more than once, and it's obvious it comes from her own background. One is she said that setbacks are an opportunity for a comeback, that it just is a chance to prove yourself all over again. And I took that to heart. In fact, when I was first born, I was in an incubator, and I would try to turn over. My mom nicknamed me Mighty Mouse because I kept trying to do these things. And so she kind of went with that and wrote it out. He kept saying, nothing's going to get you down, and you're a fighter. And whatever challenge I wanted to take on, she was all for it, even though back in the day, some of the goals I had were not typical in the United States because it was a pretty sexist society, much worse than it is today. If I wanted to try out for being a pitcher on a baseball league, go for it. If you want to go to graduate school, that's really nice. But she said, whatever goal you do your best. Don't just try things for a month and then drop it. You do your best. So if you want to try out for band, go for first chair. If you want to go to graduate school, go to the Big Ten. But don't say I'm going to do it and not put your whole effort into it. And so she never saw setbacks as anything more than a temporary obstacle. And what are you going to learn from this? What's the message? Did you miss something? Do you need to go back and relearn something and start anew before you press on? And so I never had this victim mentality ever. And she wouldn't have allowed it. I mean, it's like, you think you got, and that was her second point, was you think you've got it bad. No matter how bad your circumstances, somebody always has it worse than you do, always. And just look wide, look at other people, look at other countries, look at what's going on in the world, and you'll see that you have assets, you have resources that other people do not have that you need to be grateful for. And that was confirmed many years later when I got into photography and I was teaching cross-cultural psychotherapy. And I decided the best way to do that would be to travel internationally and visit people of different continents in very remote, far-flung places. And the things that I saw and the things that I ended up getting involved in, I had no idea until I saw it firsthand. I mean, people that were so sick that would never see a physician. I don't care what your condition was. There was no chance, no hope that you would ever see a doctor. Or people that had filthy drinking water and kids that were starving and women that had no rights at all. They were just property. And you look at that and boy, does that make you look at your life different. It's like, wow, I have an education. I have my health. I have legal rights. I've got a family that supports me. It isn't so bad. You know, it isn't the worst thing possible. And she also taught me never to lose sight of being having gratitude. That if you are grateful for things, it makes your depression better. And I think that's true because even during the worst times after my husband was murdered, you know, I was grateful that I had the legal system behind me. I was grateful I had a roof over my head. I was grateful I had reliable transportation. I was grateful I had friends. I was grateful I had a wonderful detective, Marlis Landeros, to help me through this. And when you are grateful, it does help you get through the toughest times. I believe that. And it's always that, you know, if you have that mindset, you will find something to be grateful for. Even if it's only that your dog is excited to see you at the end of the day, it puts things in perspective and keeps you from licking your wounds and just becoming a victim, which I never, ever wanted to do. The other lesson she kind of drove home is to treat other people like you would want to be treated, no matter their station in life. She really drove that point home. She would talk about garbage collectors or waitresses or file clerks. She said they're no better than or no worse than the leader of a country. They all put their pants on one leg at a time. And don't ever look down on somebody for the work that they do or their lack of education, that they may have street smarts. They may be the person that saves your life by lifting up a car that you've gotten trapped under. You have no idea what people are capable of. And so you always treat people, give them the benefit of the doubt, and look at them as having worth and potential. Don't look down on people. And I took that lesson to heart, and it's my mindset. I do look at people that way, and I hope I've also, you know, sent that message on to my own children because I think it's very valuable. People can get so easily caught up in status, and I have no tolerance for it. I don't, because some of the most interesting conversations I've had recently, in fact, were from people that are of a different education and background than myself. I just returned from Detroit because I'm doing an audio book of my book. And I went to visit my husband's grave. I hadn't been there in years. And I was cleaning it up. It was all grown over. And I got in this long discussion with the groundskeeper of the cemetery about the snapping turtles and, I don't know, just the history of the place. And it was for about a half hour. And when I went to the Alamo car rental place, same thing. I met Joe. His daughter's in the Detroit Police Department, and he was telling me about her struggles to succeed and be promoted in spite of being a woman. And everybody, I think, has an interesting story if you let them tell it, and you'll learn from them.
But that connects so beautifully to your international traveling and seeing people in different circumstances and understanding how, in a way, how connected we are and how, as you said, we shouldn't look down on them.
No, In fact, my older daughter, when she was about 15 and a half, she was kind of turning into this little princess, and I wasn't going to have it. So I said to her, how would you like to go to Kenya, and we're going to go see zebras, and we're going to go see lions? Oh, yeah. So we're on the plane, and I say to her, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, we're going to be in a tent, and there's no electricity. And you can't use your electric curler, and you can't use your cell phone because there's no electricity. And we're going to be working. We're going to be building a girls' school and building trusses. She didn't even know what a truss was. I said, well, we'll figure that out. And I said, and we're going to sleep in a tent. And you're going to meet girls that literally are risking their lives to go to school because of the animals that are out and about. Yeah. And flash forward, after 2 weeks, we get home from this trip, and she did give it a decent shot. She did. I'll give her credit for that. She didn't complain much. We got home, and I said to her, so how do things look to you now that we've been where we've been? And she said, I love my toilet. I love my paved roads. And I thought, how many other 15-and-a-half-year-old kids in the United States say, I love my toilet?
Yep. This is such an important lesson in life. And I think once you've experienced this and witnessed it, you never forget it.
That's exactly right. She still talks about it.
Yeah. Jen, I have 2 questions for you. First, what is cross-cultural psychotherapy? It sounds extremely interesting to me, as I'm all cross-cultural.
Cross-cultural psychotherapy would be, how do you learn? Well, first of all, you have to learn the cultural values of the population you're speaking about. Let's say if they're Chinese, you would learn about Chinese norms and cultures. And then how do you do mental health interventions with them that are simpatico with their cultural values? So they tend to be a very family-centric culture. So you would not work with them individually. You'd work with them with extended family, would be just one example. Or you might find that they're resistant to medications because there's a lot of belief about certain colors that red signifies something and yellow signifies something. So if you give them an antidepressant that's yellow, they might be alarmed because it has symbolic meaning to them. So it's basically the study of how do you adapt Western ideas of psychotherapy with the cultural background of the different populations that you might treat. And so it's not a one-fits-all kind of approach.
Oh, wow. This is fascinating. And then I was curious because when we started talking about your mom's lessons, you said these are verbal lessons. Is there anything nonverbal that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, one that always comes to mind is my parents had very few disagreements, but when they did, it was always the same thing. They would give each other the silent treatment. And then one would eventually crack a joke, and the other one would try not to laugh. And this one particular time, it was a longer standoff than normal, but none of us sweated it because we knew it was all going to blow over. It always did. And this one particular time, my dad came kind of huffing and puffing into the kitchen, and he had his work pants on that he always wore on Saturdays. They're kind of ugly, pale blue, kind of a pale blue work pants. And my mom had sewed hearts all over them. And he goes, what have you done? And she said, I just want the world to know I love you. And he goes, would you please take them off? And she smiled. So it's their sense of humor. Sometimes we could get them to dance if they were in a grouchy mood. We'd say, jitterbug for us, Mom. And come on. We put on their music, they start dancing and we would clap. And we weren't always successful getting them to dance, but when we did, it was so fun. And so she showed me the importance of humor, and she showed me the importance of music and forgiveness. And she was just a sweetheart, just a little bundle of energy.
They sound like such amazing people, and I love it that they never argued.
I wouldn't say never, but it was rare. And if it did, wow. It blew over.
I want to learn that from them. Can you teach us?
Well, I think, one of the things is they put each other first every single solitary time. Wow. There was no getting around that. In fact, they would say, our bedroom is off limits. That means you don't even step a toe in there if we're not even in there. That's off limits to you. And my dad would say, don't ever mistake the fact, that your mother comes before you kids.
Oh, wow.
And you always will be second to your mother. Don't you ever talk back to her. Don't you ever lie to her, because it's the same as lying to me. I mean, they were really strict that way. And so they had this security with each other, that there was no lies, there was no, going around each other that they were one and the same if you dealt with them. And so they expected you would do what they did. I mean, they were strict, but at the same time, they were full of life. And like, we'd go on vacation and we'd take our friends with us. They didn't care. And my mom, we thought it was so funny. We'd go on these wild, long driving vacations, and she'd pretend like we had a mobile diner in a station wagon, and she'd fix it all up inside with curtains and pretend like she was a waitress in the diner while we're going 60 miles an hour down the road. And they just found simple, easy ways to make life fun. We went to the drive-in theater every Friday, and if we were really good and really quiet, we could take our pillows up on top of the car and fall asleep up there before the show was over, because we were never able to last the whole night. And so, because we didn't have a lot of money, but, we had art projects all the time. We were always rescuing some poor creature that we found. We found a turtle once in our busy frozen street in the middle of winter. I don't know what it was doing there. And she let us have it in the bathtub all winter long till we could release it in the park the next spring. And so I never felt like we were poor. I guess we weren't poor, but we didn't have a lot of excess. We had one car, and we wore our shoes till they wore out, and we had packed lunches. We couldn't afford to get them at school and so on. But I wouldn't have trade my childhood for anything.
Wow, Jen, here comes the tricky question. Is there something important you wish she did teach you? Is there something she was not able to teach you?
Yes, and I would say this is true of both my parents, but my mom, I could not get her to sit down with me as a teenager and have a serious conversation with her about my future. Her goal for me was to graduate high school, pure and simple. And I kept saying, yeah, I know that, but what about after that? Well, just do what makes you happy. That was always her answer. Just do what makes you happy. Well, that's pretty wide open. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And she was no help in that regard. I think
she couldn't help, I guess, because she had high school, only a high school diploma.
Right. I just wish that she would have said, well, let's go to the library and look it up, or let me connect you with somebody who's been to college, or let's look at what happens when women enter the military or the Peace Corps or something, But it was not something that she could be engaged in discussing even. It was, she just drop it like, I don't know, just do what makes you happy. And that was the end of it. So that was hard, because I knew more. And when I left high school, I knew more of what I didn't want out of life than what I did want out of life. And I was kind of bumbling around. I didn't really know what I wanted to do because I had no exposure to it. I mean, our neighborhood was very traditional. I knew almost nobody that went to college except my teachers. And there was no role models back then. I'm talking the 50s and 60s. So I came out of high school with a blank slate. It's like, I don't even know the first step in getting into college, let alone what I want to do with it. I didn't know anything about it.
You didn't have counselors in school back then who would support kids to get into colleges?
That's the part. They would support males.
Oh, okay.
Not females.
Sorry for my ignorant question.
No, they'd be like, well, don't you want to be a clerk and a file clerk, or don't you want to be a secretary? And I'm going, no, I don't want to be a secretary. And they'd say, well, what do you like to do? And I didn't even want to get into it with them because I didn't respect them. And so I come up with these crazy, stupid answers just to bait them. So when I left high school, and I was like in a fog. I really didn't know what I wanted.
How did you figure it out?
Well, I was typing a book for the psychologist who would later become my husband. That was the one who was murdered. And he was very supportive. And he said, of course you can do this. This is how you do it. And you A, B, C, D, and this is how you get into school. And I did, and I excelled, and I got a scholarship. And then we ended up getting married. And then he said, well, you should go to graduate school. And I agreed. And And I got my master's degree. And then I said, I want to go on for my doctorate. And he was like, well, okay. And I did that. And then I said, I want to go for my postdoc. And he's like, really? And I go, yeah, really. And he's like, well, you don't really need to do that. It's not required. And I said, I know, but I really want to do it. And he stepped aside and let me do it. But I don't think he was keen on the idea, but he did. And I love it. I mean, I love the field of psychology. There's other things that interest me, but I've never regretted it.
It's interesting. Two things are interesting to me here, that you also met your husband in high school, obviously, like your mom.
I was just out of high school.
Yeah.
I was just out of high school.
And that his role in your life was to provide this support that your mom didn't.
That's right. I didn't know it then.
Yeah.
See, he was 18 years older. And I do think that, looking back, that was a huge factor in my attraction to him. He was the first one to really unconditionally believe in my future and say, of course you can do it. Of course you can do it. I'm like, really, me? And he was like, of course, yes. And much to my surprise, as much as I disliked high school, I loved college. Because to me, high school was just busy work. It was waste of my effort. And I didn't like all the time spent on kids with spit wads and discipline issues. And I didn't like having to walk in the snow with the skirt. There's a lot I didn't like about high school. But college, oh my gosh, I was infatuated with it.
I was same like you. I always hated school until I started college. And once I was studying what I was interested in, that was completely different. I couldn't I was hungry for what I was studying. And that was great.
Right.
Wow, Jen, thank you so much for sharing so many amazing things with me.
You're welcome.
And my listeners. Let me try to recap. The lessons you've learned are that setbacks are an opportunity for a comeback. I love your parentheses of don't become a victim, which is a very big lesson. No matter how dire your circumstances are, someone always has it worse than you. And here we talked about international travel and importance of witnessing this and just keeping that always in mind. And that beautifully connects to the next lesson, which is gratitude. Never forget to be grateful for the good things you have in life, as you wrote, especially during rough times. And then treat people how you want to be treated, no matter what their station is in life. Don't look down on other people. I wrote something else while you were talking. I put self-confidence here, which I understood you learned from your mom. I also wrote down, what are you going to learn from this? Which is always a good thing to remember then when times are hard and when you face challenges in life, to understand that they help you to grow. Whatever you do, do your best. That's what I wrote down. And then as a lesson you wish she did teach you was to help you plan your future, especially your professional future.
Yeah, they didn't have any blueprint for that.
Yeah.
And I think partly it was because my mom didn't go beyond high school, but I think it was also part of the era.
It's the culture,
Because I even when I went to graduate school, I had people telling me, you're taking up a man's position, a student position. And I'm like, well, what? Let him come on his own.
It's very good for my generation and younger generations to be reminded of this, Jen, because we so take it for granted, the rights that we have, and that when we went to college, nobody dared to say that. And it's just a generation before us that had to hear these things,
I used to wear this T-shirt when I was in my doctoral program, and the front of the T-shirt said, a woman's place is in the House. And then the back of the T-shirt said, and in the Senate.
I love it. And now you should translate it to my international listeners. Okay. The House and the Senate.
They're two big wings of politics in the United States. The House is the House of Representatives, and the Senate is the Senate where you have two representatives per state. But they're very powerful roles in the United States government.
I love it.
But, one thing I do want to add, that just so there's no misunderstanding about this, when I took my daughter to Kenya, I also reminded her and talked with her about the advantages of those individuals that we saw in Kenya. I said, look, they don't have gang issues. They're not addicted to Facebook. There's not rampant gangs.
Yeah.
Where we were in a very remote place. We were in the Olipikidange area near the Rift Valley. And I said, I don't want you pitying them. That's not why we're here.
Yeah.
Don't look down on them that way. It's not like we have everything. Oh my God, these poor people. But look at their strengths. The fact that they know 5 languages and we know 1 is an example, And I said, we could learn a lot from them. I mean, could I survive living on what they lived on for 6 months? I don't think so. I wouldn't know how to brush my teeth using a bush, but they did, I don't know which snakes are poisonous and which ones are going to get you, but they knew. And so it was a balance. I tried to give the balance to her as well.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I guess in parting, one of the things I'd like to add is one thing that my mentor taught me when I was in my postdoctoral fellowship program. We were talking about parenting, and I was talking about some parents that I was working with, and they'd made certain mistakes. And he goes, oh, thank goodness. And I go, what do you mean, thank goodness? And he goes, every child needs parents who make mistakes, because if they don't get that, they're going to grow up not being able to tolerate imperfection and not having the tools they need to solve problems. That we need parents that are realistic, that are 3-dimensional, and nobody's perfect. And we don't want to teach them that, or have them expect that they're going to get a perfect world by having, quote, perfect parents. And that's their first exposure. So it's a good thing that parents aren't perfect.
I love this. Thank you for adding that.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Jen, thank you so much for being my guest.
Okay.
This was really, really very... At first I had to digest, and then I got very inspired. Thank you for that. I hope my listeners did too.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider. That's Tajder. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.